How's it going, guys? I'm Brandon from Woodworks. Welcome back to the channel. On today's video, I'm going to show you how I built this fairly simple yet custom boot rack. So if you guys are interested in the build, stick around. I had a couple hickory boards laying around left over from another project, so I decided to use them for the shelves. You could pretty much use any type of wood for this, including common 1x6s from your local home store, or you could even use 1x12s if you don't feel like doing a glue up. I started out by measuring how long I wanted my shelves and rough cut them a couple inches longer so I could bring them to final size later. If you're using 1x6s, you'll need 4 of them. I chose to make my boot rack 4 feet long, but you could adjust this to fit your needs. The next step was to take the 4 boards over to the table saw and rip them to width. If this is your first time to the channel, I'd really appreciate it if you would consider subscribing and hitting that notification bell to get notified when I drop new videos. Okay, back to the build. I took the boards for the shelves over to the miter saw to square up the ends, but still leaving a little extra to trim off later after the glue up to bring them down to final size. The next thing I needed to address was the legs. I wanted a modern look that was clean and wouldn't take away from the shelves. I had some alder cutoffs laying around, so I decided to use those up. I ripped them all down to about 2 inches wide over at the table saw and left them the thickness they came milled at, which was about 1.25 inches. Once they were ripped to width, I took them over to the miter saw and trimmed them to final size. I cut the 4 pieces that will act as the post for the legs at 24 inches. The cross brace pieces will depend on how wide your shelves end up at. Mine were right at 11.25 inches. I decided to use pocket screws on the legs because they're fast, strong, and easy to do. I drilled 2 pocket holes on each end of all the cross braces with my Kreg jig. That auto adjust armor tool clamp is actually an add-on. I will leave a link to it and all the other tools I use in this video in the description below for you guys. After all the pocket holes were drilled, I could start the assembly of the legs. I used some wood glue on all the joints just to give it a little more strength. When using pocket hole joinery, you want to make sure to clamp everything together before putting the screws in to prevent the pieces from moving as you assemble it. I didn't quite have enough room for my impact driver to screw in the screws, so I used this 90-degree attachment. I bought this a while back and I use it all the time. It comes in really handy in tight spots like these. I wanted to leave enough room for boots to be put on the bottom shelf as well as shoes to be put underneath. So I installed the bottom cross brace so the top of it would sit about 5 inches up from the bottom of the legs. When installing the bottom brace, I made sure to put the pocket holes facing up so the shelf would cover them. Now it was time to glue up the shelves. I measured and marked in from the outsides about 6 inches and then evenly spaced marks between them about every 8 to 10 inches for biscuits. If you don't know what a biscuit is, it's basically a football-shaped piece of wood that helps align the 2 pieces during a glue up. You'll see him here in just a minute. I always make sure to label the boards so I don't ever get them mixed up. Okay, so the tool I'm using here is called a biscuit joiner, and they can be purchased at any home store and are relatively inexpensive. I think I paid about 70 bucks for this Ryobi one, and it works just fine. Basically, it just has a circular blade that comes out and cuts a slot in the wood for the biscuits to sit in. Whenever I do a glue up, I always put painter's tape on my clamps. It helps keep them free of glue squeeze out, and they stay a lot cleaner that way. Once I get all the boards laid back out in order, I stand 1 board up from each shelf and apply wood glue to only that edge, making sure to get the glue down in all the biscuit slots. You can glue up both shelves in one set of clamps like I'm doing here, just make sure not to glue them together. Then I can insert all the biscuits and spread the glue out evenly, making sure to coat the dry side of the biscuits thoroughly. When you're tightening your clamps, make sure your marks for the biscuits stay lined up and don't over tighten the clamps. Just snug them up enough until you see an even amount of glue squeeze out come out, and then I typically use some smaller clamps on the joint lines to ensure the boards stay aligned on the ends. And then I can go back for my bigger clamps and snug them up a little bit more. While the glue was setting up on the shelves, I started to finish sanding the legs, flushing up all the joints and breaking over any sharp edges. I then applied a pre-stain conditioner to prevent any blotching. Basically, you just brush it on, let it sit for about 5 minutes, and then go back and wipe off any excess. Let it dry completely though before applying any stain. Like I said, I wanted to have a good contrast with this piece, so I went with ebony stain for the legs. This gives it almost a black painted look, while still being able to see the wood grain. This is the same process as any other stain. I like to use a foam brush to apply mine, so I just brush it on, let it sit about 30 seconds to a minute, and then go back and wipe it all off with a rag. I repeated the same process for both legs. I usually let glue set up overnight, although most glue set up in just a few hours, and you could take the clamps off and be just fine. Remove the shelves from the clamps, and you can use a scraper to remove the majority of the glue. Then you have a couple different options for getting the shelves flat. You can either use a hand plane like I'm doing here, or if you have a thickness planer like this, it will be much faster and less work. Once I got my shelves all nice and flat, I could bring them down to final size at the table saw. I used my crosscut sled, but you could also use your miter gauge or even a circular saw with a straight edge. Then it was time to sand. I started out at 120 grit and moved my way to 180. Since I'll be using Rubio monocut on these, I stopped at 180 because that's what they recommend. I used this 1/32 inch roundover bit from a monotool to go around all the edges just to give them a slight break. It has a really small bearing on it too to get in any corners if you need to do any of that. I'll leave a link to it also in the description below for you guys. I also hand sanded all the edges just to really smooth everything out with a sanding sponge. So if you guys follow me, you know I use a lot of Rubio monocoat. It's an oil and hard wax blend finish that molecularly bonds with the wood fibers. I really like using it because it's simple and protects well without leaving a plastic looking finish. You just spread it on, wipe off the excess, let it sit for a couple minutes, and then buff it into the wood with either a blue shop rag, or you can even use a buffer with a terry cloth. And a little bit goes a long way. I am not sponsored by them or anything, I just really like this product. I also used it on the legs, applying it with a rag and using the same process off camera. Once everything was dry, I could attach the shelves to the legs. I did this just by pre-drilling, countersinking, and driving screws up from the bottom so you can't see them. It got a little tricky when attaching the bottom shelf, but with the help of some clamps to hold it in place, I got it lined up and attached. So this was a simple and functional build that I really enjoyed. As always, thank you guys for watching. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up and let me know what you think about it in the comments below. I'll see you guys on the next one.